So in the last lecture, I talked to you just briefly about how you can actually measure fitness. Now we're going to measure fitness. Talking about genetic variation and how that variation will impact fitness rates. Fitness is ultimately a measure of reproductive success, and it can be measured many different ways. If it were up to you, scientists out there in the room, how would you measure the reproductive success of an organism? Give me one measure. All right, how many offspring survive? Same thing. Any others? What? Same thing. Everybody's like, just how many offspring survive? You can do how many eggs you lay, how many reproductive events you have, how many offspring are then able to not just survive, but reproduce. Lots of different ways to measure fitness. You as the scientist are going to be the one who has to define it when you're doing your study. It could be, here this frog is just laying eggs, a bunch of frog eggs. It could be how many offspring you produce. It could be how many offspring you go on for reproductive success. This is the Duggars, right? They're from that, what is it, like 20 and counting? How many kids do they have? An insane number of children. By any measure of biology, they are successful. They have passed on their genes to the next generation in spades. There's going to be a lot more of them, likely, than of your offspring running around. Please let them alone. No, actually, look. It doesn't matter, actually, truthfully. It's all a reproductive race, right? If you out-reproduce them, and then your alleles get passed on to the next generation, you win the game of life. It's not about getting to the end and getting the mortgage. It's about reproduction. You can measure it lots and lots of different ways. Here's where the math comes back. Sorry. When you compare genotypes, you can assign a fitness value of 1 to the highest fitness. It's a comparative value. The remaining groups are then assigned a value relative to that. So let's just go with, we've got 3 possible genotypes. Big A, big A, big A, little a, little a, little a. We're going to measure fitness in this case by how many offspring are produced by an individual. So how many, you guys can just throw out numbers here. How many offspring did big A have? Okay, 5. How about big A, little a? 3. How about little a? 2. All right, just that easy. So far, so good? We've got our fitness values. That's something I'll likely give you on an exam. Which one of these is the most fit by your measure? Big A, big A. And how many is that one? That's got 5. So we're going to make big A equal to 5 over 5, which equals 1. All right? Big A, little a. It's going to be equal to 3 over 5. Little a equals 2 over 5, which is equal to 0.2. And the middle one was 0.6. Done. Correct. Right. Sorry, you're right. It was 0.4. That is the math that I needed you to do today. Yeah, that's easy math, right? So far, so good? I'm going to give you a problem. Here we go. We have chickens. Our measurement of fitness in a group of chickens is the number of eggs produced. AA produces 12, a produces 5, and little a produces 1. What are the relative fitness values? Which one's the most fit? So what is it going to be equal to? 1. Big A, little a, what's that going to be? 5 over 12. And then little a? 1 over 12. And you could use a calculator, I guess, but there you go. There are the answers. Questions? This is way better than what we did last time, right? There's none. That was it. Here's another one, right? Lizards with genotype big A, little a produce an average of 2 offspring each. Big A produce, and little a produce an average of 1. What are the relative fitness values? 1 over 2, 1, 1 over 2. Everybody good? That's fitness. The fittest organisms you can describe using just simply setting everything equal to 1. Now, fitness will lead, we're not going to do math on these, but fitness then can let us understand how populations are evolving over time. Which one you're going to expect to see rise in frequency versus the genotype or the phenotype that's going to decrease in frequency. When you have one phenotype that's selected for above the others, one specific phenotype, you're going to get a directional selection event. You're moving in a certain direction. For example, height. Height in humans is actually selected for oftentimes. We as a species have grown taller over the past few hundred years because people choose to mate with taller people. It's just the way it is. I know, impacted me a lot in high school, but it's the way it is. So if one generation has a lot of sort of, a standard curve of people, some that are really short, some that are really tall, most people right in the middle, you get random mating or even non-random mating, actually non-random mating. What you're going to see is a selection event will occur where some people can mate more often, leading to higher values. If taller people mate more often, you're going to have a taller population as a whole. Each successive generation will then edge this upward. Okay, think about moths. Black versus white moths. After the Industrial Revolution, you had black soot cutting the trees. So the original population had whites, black, and then some middle value. Over time, you're going to have more and more of the black moths being shown. Stabilizing selection is where an intermediate phenotype produces an advantage. So you don't have an extreme height one way or the other. Tall people, people may still prefer to mate with tall people, but I don't know. If you get too tall, you run into doors and you die. So you don't get to mate. Short people, they're going to be, selected against anyway, just because of that. And you end up with a middle height, slightly lower than the edge of the door, that will allow people to, that will be selected for. Stabilizing selection. You have diversifying selection. 2 or more phenotypes are favored simultaneously. Super tall people, super short people, nobody in the middle. This leads to speciation. You have 2 different groups that continue to mate just with each other, and that's it. Butterflies do this a lot, moths. If you end up with this group over here being very, very distasteful, that is, they look like they're poisonous or they don't taste very good. This group over here looking different, but still looking poisonous, and this group right in the middle looking delicious. The middle group is eaten, and these 2 end up becoming very, very separate. So here's an example, is the female mimics an unpalatable species on either end, and in the center you're going to have a delicious species. There's balancing selection. Sometimes a heterozygote serves as a to maintain genetic polymorphisms. You have in your immune system what's called the major histocompatibility complex. You may never have heard of it unless you've taken some advanced human anatomy physiology course. But effectively what happens is your body produces lots of antibodies. You've heard of antibodies before, haven't you? Your body makes these things, and they're in certain shapes that are meant to latch on to bad things, germs and things, bacteria, viruses. They recognize them. If you're homozygous at that location, you're only going to make a certain group of them, a certain group of antibodies. But if you're heterozygotes, Suddenly you have twice as much variation to deal with, and you can make a lot more varied things. Does that make sense? So if you're heterozygous, you got different components that can come together in different ways, almost like if you take two Lego blocks, you can put them together in multiple ways. If you're a heterozygote, you're going to be more fit because your body can fight off more diseases. If you're a homozygote, you're going to be slightly less fit. Interestingly enough, there have been human studies where females can actually determine by scent whether or not a male has different set of alleles than she does at that locus. Statistically significant findings. It was weird. The way they set up this experiment was they had everyone work out. So you go to the gym and you work out with no deodorant, no antiperspirant, anything like that. That was important to the study. And then they took everybody's shirts. All the male shirts went on one line, all the female shirts went on another line, and they had people go through and sniff them to figure out which one smelled the best to them. And inevitably, the females were able to pick, well, the female choice was the male who had a different set of genes at their major histocompatibility complex than they did. They were choosing, based on smell, so that their offspring would be heterozygotes. That was weird to me. Yes?
Apparently there's a dating site that does exactly the same thing. Like, you'll get sent shirts from these guys that have, like, worn them for weeks, and you're supposed to smell them to see which one you like. And then
so there are dating sites based off of this now, this study. Not kidding. That happened. That was a thing. That's interesting. My 101 class last spring cracked me up because they came up with a dating site called Mendelove. It was like Mendelove, 2 peas in a pod. And it was brilliant. I thought that was the best thing I'd heard all summer, or all semester. And it was all based off of find the people whose genes match up at your loci. It was interesting. But this happens. That's balancing selection. The heterozygote selected for. Another big example of this heterozygote being selected for is sickle cell anemia. Do you guys know what sickle cell anemia is? Your blood gets into a weird crescent shape and it ends up blocking in your veins. You die. Not right away, but it's possible. So in sub-Saharan Africa, the sickle cell anemia allele is super high in the population. In our population, it's really, really, really low. It's selected against. But in Africa, it's not. The reason for that is because if you have sickle cell anemia, a homozygous recessive condition, you have 2 alleles of it, you may probably die. Your fitness is lowered because you're less likely to reproduce due to death. If you have homozygous dominant alleles, though, in sub-Saharan Africa, you're not going to die of sickle cell anemia, but you could die of malaria. If you have 1 sickle cell allele and 1 dominant allele, you don't have sickle cell anemia, and you're immune to malaria. So therefore, that sickle cell anemia allele is high in the population because it confers a benefit. It balances. Which is this slide. So this is what the sickle cell red blood cells look like. They latch onto each other after a while. They sort of clot up very easily. With sickle cell anemia, that sickle cell allele does provide a balancing selection. So far, we've got directional selection, diversifying selection, stabilizing selection, and balancing selection. Any questions? You guys gonna be okay to explain those? Probably. So we've talked about mutation. We've talked about selection. One type of selection is sexual selection. One or the other gender chooses their mate based upon specific sexual characteristics. When you see something really weird in the animal kingdom, some structure that you look at and you're like, that should not exist, it is very likely there because of sexual selection. The peacock's tail, by all rights, should not exist. It is deleterious to the survival of the male. These big plumes. With big plumes, it means you cannot run very quickly and escape wolves. You can't hide because they can grab you by the plumes and pull you out. But females love them. Thus, the bigger the plume, the more likely they are to mate, so the more likely their offspring are to have big plumes. We have two types of sexual selection: intrasexual selection and intersexual selection. In intrasexual selection, two members of the same sex compete directly for the opportunity to mate. You see this a lot in animals. Bullfrogs, if you go out at night, you're going to hear frogs calling. But more importantly, you're going to see, like here, you've got two deer fighting, kangaroo fighting, elephant seals smashing up against each other, which is freaking dangerous. I mean, it might seem comical, but these things weigh like 2 or 3 tons each. That much mass smacking into each other is big. You got intersexual selection, calling out and saying, look at me, I'm here. Come mate with me. Choose me. Intersexual selection usually, more often than not, deals with female mate choice. The female chooses a male to mate with. And I love these images. The whole puffing up, the peacocks showing their tails. You guys have very likely encountered intrasexual and intersexual selection. We are not that far removed from these organisms. I think a lot of you guys used to be in high school fairly recently, right? How many of you guys were in high school within like the past 5 years? Okay, good. And even for those of you who weren't, trust me, it hasn't changed. The best times to view this, in case you couldn't figure it out, I may not have been the most popular person in high school, but I got to watch the popular people, and it was super interesting, especially like during lunch. Lunch is where you take all of these people who barely tolerate each other, but there's a lot of real tension that's there, and there's hormones, and there's all this stuff going on, and you throw them in a room together and have teachers surrounding the outside, just, keep it all contained. And you always see the same things. A fight starts out. You go to see a fight. What happens at the beginning of any fight in high school? Somebody yells, stop it. What do the people do as they're gearing up to fight? What? They argue? Are they sitting down while they argue? No, they're not sitting down while they're arguing. What's their body language look like? They're in their face. Okay, so few things, what I've noticed, and please correct me if I'm wrong. First thing that happens, they're sitting down, right? Everything's calm and collected, and then suddenly they stand up and they thrust their shoulders back. What that does is just like the freaking birds. Behold my chest. I am bigger than I am. I am displaying for you. It's a territory thing, but it's also selection of mates thing. People look. Now you got two people who are fighting. Why are they fighting? They have no real reason to fight. I mean, honestly, there's not much going on. What did people fight about in high school? What? I don't care. Just really. What? Rumors. What were the rumors about? Usually. Somebody doing what? It's all about sex, right? Right back to this. Now I have to defend myself, get really big, and display. That's huge. Think about, this always drives me crazy. You've seen people driving around with really loud stereos, right? They're not doing that for them, are they? No, they're not. Think of freaking like bullfrogs. It's all about going along. I am blasting this as loud as I possibly can, not because I can't hear it, but I need you to hear it. Why do I need you to hear it? So that you understand you can mate with me. Does that make sense? No. Think about it too. When they're doing it, do they have their bass really low? Their bass is going, it's like very, very deep bass. Who else gets a deep bass? Frogs, lizards. Why? It travels farther to attract a mate. It all comes down to, please, please mate with me. Look at all of these things I am doing to get your attention. It's freaking hilarious. Start thinking of humans as animals, and then you just go around campus. Go to your classes. Your classes, people aren't, okay, I'll be honest. This is probably one of the few classes you guys talk to anybody in. But most classes, you go in, and before class, people are displaying for each other. Some people are trying to show, I am not interested in mating right now. What are they doing? They're on their phones, looking down, not making eye contact with anybody. Some people are absolutely displaying, I am here, look at me, you would like to mate with me. Humans are crazy. Take a look around. So you've got intrasexual, where two of the same gender are fighting it out for a mate. And you have intersexual, where one gender or the other is trying to display to attract a mate for choice. It leads to some weird stuff. Really weird stuff. Some of the weirdest stuff. Think of the narwhal. You guys know what a narwhal is? Yeah, you guys know what narwhal has this super long tooth that's growing out of its mouth. It's like the worst snaggle tooth in the world. It's not a horn growing out of its head or anything like that. It's a tooth. And it's actually two teeth that have wrapped around each other and grown straight out. Why do they have that? Well, it's not. It's for reproduction. I can't tell you the number of times I've talked to college students who have told me that the narwhal has that in order to hunt. Think about it. Yeah, they're like, go at the fish, stab it. How do you get the fish off? You have to like go up to the ice and like scrape it off? My little sister, think of a moose's horns. Moose's horns aren't all about, antlers, sorry. They're not all about protection. It's all about being able to fight with each other. So I distinctly remember this. It was one of the worst family vacations. If my parents ever hear this, they're going to hate this. One of the worst family vacations we ever went on, because we're like, we're going to Disney World. And they're like, no, we're going to the Smoky Mountains. I was like, oh, we are. Whee! So there I am in a car, small car with my two sisters in the back seat. Super fun. But I don't want to be there. Oh, and this is not when we're like super young either. This is like in high school. Yeah, right? I'm in there with my little sister, and we're talking because she wants to see a moose. And I was like, I don't know if they're around. She's like, well, there are a lot of squirrels around. So why wouldn't there be a moose? And I was like, because squirrels are not moose. And she said, well, squirrels eat moose. No, moose eats squirrels. Moose eats squirrels. That's what it is. Moose eats squirrels. And I was like, what? Why do you say that? And she's like, well, why else do they have the antlers? And I was like, wait. Before we go on, how do you expect that they catch the squirrels? And I said, well, they run them up to the tree, and they hit them with their antlers. I said, well, how do they get them off their antlers? Because then I just imagined this moose with just squirrel carcasses hanging off their antlers. So well, they go up, and they sort of like running off the tree. Right. And I was like, oh, no, that's not what it's for. Turns out, though, surprisingly enough, they've now captured evidence that deer will eat squirrel carcasses. So that's interesting. It's when they have a calcium deficiency. But so in the end, I guess my little sister won that one. But that's the way it is. Sexual selection can be balanced by predation. Without having that balance, without having predation, these sexual traits are going to just go off the chart. Giant racks that things have to just drag around, giant antlers. That narwhal's tooth, 30 feet long. They will keep growing and growing and growing if they're not balanced by predation. These are guppies. You've probably seen guppies at stores and everything. Guppies are beautiful colors, but those colors don't really happen much in nature. Because the more colorful you are, the bigger your tail, the harder it is for you to escape a predator. But the females love them. Female guppies love gigantic tails. They love bright colors. They will mate with the biggest tail and the brightest color every time. Thing is, though, in nature, before they're able to reproduce, those males with the big tails and the bright colors get eaten. So you don't have that variation in the wild. In a fish tank, though, where there are no predators, you're going to get this all the time. Selection is acting on all traits at the same time. It's not just one trait. Just like when we looked at the crow and the beetles. It's not just the beetles who are adapting, it's the crows who are doing so as well. Here, it's not just one trait that's changing, it's all the traits that are being selected for.